think in my life, this idea of playing it safe has allowed me to work with many people, right? Because I think that playing it safe is the norm and not the exception. In my life, I think the biggest thing is that I don't want to do playing it safe actions that are going to restrict my work. I don't want to listen to my mind in a way that it's going to narrow what I can or cannot do, or how much I can do it or I cannot, right? So I think the way that playing it safe has shaped me is about stepping back and checking once again why this is important. Why do I really want to be doing that? Why, what's behind, being told no or being rejected, right? How do I want to face this? So I think it's really about unpacking the reasons, my drivers, when I'm trying to play it safe, and checking if it helps me to be a person I want to be or not.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com.
You're ready to get back into yoga, so you ordered the essentials: a non-slip mat, yoga blocks to keep balance, and an exercise ball. And you used your Bank of America Cash Rewards credit card, choosing to earn 3% cash back on online shopping, or up to 5.25% as a preferred rewards member, which you put towards the cost of your most essential yoga gear, noise-canceling headphones. Apply for yours at bankofamerica.com/more rewarding. Copyright 2020 Bank of America Corporation.
Imagine if you could shop the shelves of all your local liquor stores at the same time. Well, spoiler alert, you can with Drizzly, the #1 alcohol delivery app. Drizzly lets you compare prices from local liquor stores on a huge selection of beer, wine, and spirits, then get them delivered right to your door in under 60 minutes. And right now, Drizzly is giving all new customers $5 off their first order. Just enter promo code SAVE5 at checkout. Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com.
Capital One is using a modern service architecture, data streaming, and cloud technology to simplify shopping. So before you hit the buy button, Capital One Shopping is already searching for available coupons and automatically applying them at checkout, making shopping better by keeping more money in your wallet. Learn more about how Capital One is using cloud-native architecture to fuel the future at CapitalOne.com/cloud. Capital One. What's in your wallet? Savings and available coupons may vary. Stress, sleep, recovery. Whether we're in the gym or at work, these things really shape how we perform. I know that I need a good night's sleep to do my best creative work, but sometimes that just doesn't happen. And one of the things that I've added to my routine that's made a noticeable difference is Newcom. I did my first 2 sessions recently, and I was amazed by how much it could re-energize you. It was like an afternoon power nap combined with a meditation that led to a lot greater focus throughout the day. It's imperative to your health and happiness to be able to manage stress and not be managed by it. Newcom gives you the power and control to relax and recharge anywhere, anytime. Newcom is the only stress management system of its kind, clinically proven in over 1 million sessions to improve your sleep, reduce your stress, and boost your recovery without drugs and side effects. The Newcom system uses cutting-edge neuroscience and consists of 3 non-invasive and non-pharmaceutical items, all of which are included in your monthly subscription that costs less than a daily cup of coffee. The whole process is easy to use and to work into your daily routine to achieve better sleep, reduction in stress, and boost in recovery. Do what I did. Own the day with Newcom. We have a special link set up specifically for our listeners. Go to creativenewcom.com and get 50% off your 30-day subscription of Newcom and their money-back guarantee. That's creativenewcom.com, N-U-C-A-L-M, creativenewcom.com. Welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be chatting with you.
Yeah, it is my pleasure to have you here. So I found out about your work, 1, because you've been a long-time listener, but 2, also because you wrote in, and I was extremely intrigued by what you're up to, because I think it's highly relevant given what's going on in the world today. It's stuff that I think, I needed myself. But before we get into all of that, particularly given the sound of your voice, I wanted to start by asking you, where in the world did you grow up, and what impact has that ended up having on the choices that you've made throughout your life and your career?
Wow, I love that question. I was born in South America, in Bolivia. and I was born in the capital of Bolivia. It's a small city called Sucre. And I came to the States in 2001. That's a long time ago, right? So I have been like the last 20 years living in the Bay Area. And I think when I think about in which ways growing up in Bolivia has shaped me, I think there's so many layers to that question. One of them, I think, is that I was born in the middle of a dictatorship in my country. My country was under a dictatorship between 1970 to 1978. And I was still a kid. I was, 4 or 5 years old. But at that time, it was very clear, like on Sundays and Wednesdays, we have to pick up food for everyone in the neighborhood. So everyone was getting together and distributing, right, all types of food supplies, because that's what was going on in the country. And I think that memory has shaped me a lot on the sense that the us is more important than the I. That together is more important than what I want for myself and by myself, right? And so I think that sense of community, it has been very strong in my life. And when I came to the States, I still, I'm definitely shaped by that. It just happens also that with that way of thinking more about us versus I was very shy with my work. I was scared about saying, well, but I think I can do this or that, right? So I had to overcome my own learning history and find a balance between realizing that the us is better than the I, but also that at times you do have to go into the I mode and say, yes, I can do this and I know that, right? So I think that has been one of the biggest influences I had coming from Bolivia and then coming to the States as an adult.
So, I wonder, in the culture in Bolivia, when parents are raising their children, like when they're being educated, what are the sort of predominant narratives about, your education and the role that it plays later in your life in terms of, hey, go do this as a career? Are they like Indian parents where it's like, hey, go become a doctor, engineer, or lawyer, or is it different? Like what do you, what is that like?
That's another beautiful question. I love it. So I am coming from a working class family in which usually the men have been doctors and the women were teachers. At the time, I think when I was a teenager, maybe I realized how much there was some gender difference in terms of a career choice, what people could do. And very early at that time, I was confused about that to a certain degree, but there was one constant message that my family always say. They say, Patricia, you don't have your looks, you don't have your skills, you have your education. So you better do everything you can with education, right? So I grew up with this idea that I have to protect my brain, right? I just have to go to school and succeed and do things right.
Yeah.
When I finished high school, I did wanted to be a psychologist. My family was very concerned, because they say, well, we don't know if that's going to be successful. You're a woman. You have to think about security, right? But they were also clear that the only thing that will allow me to have the life I want to have is education, right? So they ended up saying, okay, fine. They ended up supporting the idea. But I think this notion that you can only have stability in life through education, it was super key. The notion that guys go to become a doctors and women become teachers softened up over the years, right? But certainly I think traditionally it was like that. It's just with my generation, it started shifting a little bit.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that caught my attention was that you mentioned you come from a working class family. And the funny thing is, here in the United States, nobody who's working class would say that their parents are doctors. Like, doctors are not considered a working class occupation here. Like, why is that the case in a place like Bolivia?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different in the sense that Bolivia, yes, certainly I totally hear that. Certainly Bolivia, I think in the 90s, Bolivia was one of the poorest countries, right? So the working class in South America, it's different than the working class in the States.
Yeah.
On the sense that the access to resources, the access to technology, for example, it's certainly different, right? So I think that in Bolivia, traditionally, most men have been doctors or lawyers and women were teachers. And when we think about working class, I think that the access to resources is quite different than in the States, quite different, right? Not necessarily bad, but just quite different. It's a very different thing to be living in a first world country versus in a third world country, even where you're in the same frame of a working class.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, it reminds me of this thing that Trevor Noah said when people were going insane buying toilet paper everywhere. He said, clearly, these people have never been to a third world country. It was like, turn on the shower.
That's right. I think there's so many differences, right? Culturally speaking, the lifestyles, and really what you're pinpointing. What does it mean to be working class in South America versus what does it mean to be working class in the States, right?
Yeah. I think you mentioned you're a mother, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is something I always wonder about immigrant parents. Like, you grew up in Bolivia, you came to the United States. What aspects of culture have you retained and continued to instill in raising your son or daughter, as well as like what parts have you integrated from American culture? Like, how do you have the balance between the two?
That's a very I love that you asked this very, I think, thoughtful questions. You make me pause. I love that. I think the biggest thing for me has been really making sure that people we love, they know that we love them. My family has grown up with that. We're very affectionate people in so many ways, right? Physically, we're caring with each other. And I think at times it's easy to forget that because of the busyness of life, because we have stuff to do, right? Yeah. So I think my mom and my grandmother, they always say, make sure that the people that you love, they know you love them. Mm-hmm. And I think that is super important in a time in which we are living under extreme degrees of distress, at a time in which we have so much technology that we can be consumed by that we may forget that what really matters at the end is the people that is with us, next to us. Mm-hmm. And that it's never enough to show how much we care for them, right? So I think for me, that has been a constant then, and it continues to be a constant now. It's something I'm always thinking, how can I show kindness and how can I show caring to this person that I care, right? Yeah. Which I think it's really, for me, it's coming from my upbringing and how I grew up with my family. So that will be one of those ways that I have kept with me.
So, it's funny when you talk about how love is expressed and letting people know that you love them. Like, I think about that. That's it's an interesting contrast from Indian parents who, I was telling, my cousin and I we're here in Boulder. We're talking to my dad, and he was in India, and he was like, he looks at us. He's like, yeah, I got to go eat breakfast. I'll talk to you guys later. And we're like, clearly he doesn't give a shit about talking to us right now. And we joke. It's like, oh, if my sister had called, that would have been an hour phone call. But the funny thing is that they don't necessarily express love in ways that we wanted to. And this is something I think I had to come to terms with, that, just it isn't expressed in the way that I want it to be expressed, according to my quote unquote love languages, which it turns out are words of affirmation and physical affection, two things that Indian parents suck at, like pretty unanimously. But then, he'll do random things like, hey, it's like I sent you a pack of pajamas from Costco, or we sent you 2 air filters. It's like, why? It's because they're on sale. And to me, I was like, okay, cool. That is very clearly. And my cousin made a good point. He said, here's the thing you have to realize about Indian parents. He's like, they'll never, be affectionate with you. Potentially, they may not express, physical affection or even verbal affirmation. But the one thing is, no matter how old you are, or no matter how bad the situation is, that door will always be open for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think one of the challenges that we face in relationships, all types of relationships, is how we can learn to accept the love that comes from the other person, that may not be our own way, may not be our preference, right? And by nature, we may be confused, we may reject sometimes, or we try to impose, like, no, but I want this, right? But I think relationships many times push us to just drop the rope and open up to what is in front of us, and really accept people as they come with what they have, which is not easy to do, certainly not. Yeah. I think it's key for relationships to keep growing, right? To accept that you're that's how he cares, by buying extra things, right? Right? May not be ideal, may not be what you want, and yet that's the way that people show up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember for a while I used to be kind of upset that my dad hadn't read my books, and I was like, "Wait a minute, I wouldn't." And my dad is a weird person who is a college professor who genuinely doesn't read books for leisure, which is the strangest thing to me. But it's like, okay, I'm asking a guy who doesn't read books to read a book, and then I realized, I was like, wait a minute, I would have never even been able to write these books if he hadn't been willing to let me stay at home for like 7 years.
Yeah. It's so funny you mentioned that. I remember I used to be cranky with my family exactly about that same thing, because it takes a lot of, I think, time and effort, and it's very anxiety provoking to be writing and putting a book out there. And I think at the most I got questions like, okay, how's the book going? How many chapters did you write? I never got a question about what was the book about, right?
Yeah.
But when I was in Bolivia, they were happy to take pictures with me and celebrate and have dinner. And I used to be cranky. How come you don't ask me what the book is about? Love this, right? But then I think with time, because it wasn't easy, there was a part of me that felt unseen, right? It's my work, it's how I'm thinking. How come you're not curious about that? And I think my old behaviors were maybe trying to impose that view that they should ask me, right? It's one way they could do it. But I have to learn that they are doing the best they can in their own way. And it's valid for what it is, right? Do I still get cranky by that? Sure, sometimes from time to time. I'm a human being, not a perfect being, right? But my degree of tolerance, also learning that this is how they love me, this is how they can see me right now, has gone up a little bit.
Well, I love that idea of people doing the best they can with what they have, because, I don't think, you look at many parents, they're not like well-versed in kind of things that you're an expert in, or, read endless amounts of self-help books. And this is something I always ask people who are in your field. Are you immune to the bullshit that like every other parent deals with? As a psychologist, as somebody who is well-versed in how to deal with, with problems, you help people deal with problems that, like they can't solve themselves. But when these problems show up in your own life, are you immune to like the ways that other people react to them, or do you still have the same sort of things that we all deal with?
That's a beautiful question. So hashtag therapists are humans, right? I think when I think about the pandemic, for example, right, in 4 days I have to move my practice from being face to face to be a virtual practice. I didn't have, we just have to troubleshoot as quick as possible, and I did it. I did what needed to be done. But the next week, I was having micro emotional roller coasters, right? I was crying, I was sad, I was angry, I was frustrated. So I think even when you can have all the most sophisticated skills, being human also means messing up sometimes, and means not doing the things as effectively as we want all the time, right? So I think opening up to just be gentle and caring with ourselves is also important. But while I have a large repertoire of skills and I coach my clients and I use that clients in my day-to-day life, certainly, I think so also at times it's just super hard. And I do the best I can, and sometimes may not be so effective, but that's the best I can do in that moment. So I don't think I'm immune.
Well, I think that makes a perfect segue to talking specifically about your work. The thing that you mentioned when you wrote in, and there are two areas that I want to cover, based on your work. You wrote in about this idea of playing it safe. And I think that where I want to start with that is that you chose to leave your home country to come to the United States as an immigrant. And I wonder how that shaped your perspective on this whole idea of playing it safe.
That's a great question. I think that the longest story is that I grew up in a family in which I think when I look, especially women in my family were shaped by fear, right? I have many memories in which they wanted to do X and they were scared. They were scared about the outcome. They were scared about how people may perceive them. They were scared about making mistakes. And to me, so my relationship with fear started by that, right? While my family was extremely encouraging about doing many things, there was still this sense of, safetyness, right? Like as a working class family, you work hard. You don't learn to work smart. You learn to work hard, right? I have to learn to work smart later on, right? Yeah. The frame is that, you need to shoot for what is solid and stable. That means having a job from 9 to 5, right? So I think my early experiences come from those encounters with fear, how I can relate to my fears. And then later on, I had many fears about buying the wrong coffee machine, fears about, right? I spent 3 months one time searching for a coffee machine so I can make the best decision possible. Fears about choosing the wrong partner, fears about saying the wrong thing in an interview, fears about not having proper English. So I think it's human to experience fear. And when we experience fear, our brain goes into this threat mode, and we are going to play it safe sometimes. So that means that either we're going to avoid completely a situation, or we're going to approach with safety crutches. Yeah. So I think my early experience, going back to your question, is from that time when I was born. I saw clearly how fear can shape people's behaviors, and it can be very narrowing. I saw incredible people in my family, right? I think extraordinary people shaped by fear. And what fear does many times restrict your work, right? Constrict what you can do. So I think that and then coming to the States, I developed a collection of fears, right? Hundreds of them. So I think I have to learn to develop a new relationship with my own anxieties, my own fears. And that's how Playing It Safe was born, basically.
Yeah. I'm curious, like in your own experience as an immigrant, what did you find to be shocking? Like, what was your culture shock experience of being in the United States? And what were the things you found the most difficult and challenging about being here?
Hugs. Hugs. That's a very clear question to me. Because I'm coming from a place in which we just hug. We just hug and we kiss, period. Right? You meet someone, you hug and you kiss. So when I came, I was because the social signaling is different across cultures, across cultural groups, that I remember just, okay, do I hug this person? No. Do I give some shakes? No. Do I kiss this person? Is that okay? Am I being rude? Right? My mind was going on and on, trying to play it safe, actually, right? Myself.
Yeah.
But that was one of the most cultural shocks. I think now it's less, right? Because I'm like, whatever, I just hug people. But I know at the beginning that was actually quite hard for me because it's the first encounter I have with someone and we just hug and kiss, right? So I had to pause and really, really, I think, overthink how I was going to respond.
Right. Yeah. I think that when we would like when we came back from Brazil, I think all of our friends were like, this sucks. Nobody kisses you here. Nobody hugs you here. It's like, let's just go back.
That's right. I think that, to be honest, that was one of the, I think, biggest cultural shocks that I had. I still remember that. And then the other cultural shock, although this is more like the immigrant experience, right? When I was in Bolivia, I had to study English at a college level, right? You grab the book, you know the grammar, you read this, you read that, right? You're like, okay, I can do this. And then you come to the country. And then what happens? People are speaking English, not from a book. You're like, oh my gosh, what is this? So all that slangs, all the idiomatic expressions, right? That was also very interesting because they're very cultural based, right? You cannot take them literally.
Yeah.
So I think that was also interesting to me to realize the gap between what educational institutions are teaching and what we are teaching and what happens in life, right? Yeah. And there's such a contrast with that. So that was shocking too.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit more about this idea of playing it safe. You know, I just started reading this book called Bright-Sided, how the relentless promotion of, positive thinking is undermining America, which is a interesting take. And I think that, there's a sort of balancing act between, playing it safe and delusional optimism. I see people make decisions that I'm like, that's a terrible decision. Like, it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to go do this insane thing. And, I have no guarantee that it's like, I have no sort of thing to like make sure that if I fall, I'm not going to fall to my death. It's like, oh, I've never been skiing before and I think I'm going to start in a double black diamond. It's like, no, you're going to definitely hurt yourself if you do that. So how do you find the balance between, sort of playing it safe and delusional optimism? Because I think that, you can go from one extreme to the other and the other has really catastrophic consequences.
Yeah. So I think, you're raising a very important question, right? One of the things that has happened, I think we have hundreds of books in pop psychology saying that it's all about being happy and it's mind over mood, right? That the way that you think will shape all types of things. And I think the challenge with that is there is this toxic optimism on the sense that we're supposed to be always finding the silver lining in all types of things and always having a positive thought. But our mind is not designed by that, right? If you think about neuropsychology, one of the things that we know is that the brain is a content generator and a pattern making machine. And it's coming up with all types of content, blah, 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 chop, 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 about all types of things, right? And that content also sometimes is yucky thoughts that we don't like, thoughts about being a failure, thoughts about not being good enough, right? So I think it's very, it's dangerous, as you're saying, when people go into this delusional optimism just because, they should do it, right? Or because there's the mind telling them that. The way that I think about playing with safe behaviors is that when we get afraid, humans were not wired to experience discomfort. We don't like to be in pain, whether that's physical or emotional pain. So we do everything we can to run away, right? We avoid. One example, when I am driving on the freeway and I see something that may look like a dead animal, I don't look too much. I don't close my eyes because I don't want to have a car accident, but I don't look in what may seem a dead animal. And that's not a form of playing it safe because I'm avoiding, right?
Yeah.
The challenge is that no one teaches us when is effective to play it safe and when it's not, or how often we do it or when we do it, right? Every human being, we are going to play it safe, right? We try to not make a fool of ourselves. If we are going on a date, we are trying to create a good impression with a person, right? Or you're trying to make the best decision when you're buying a coffee machine, right? So I think it's natural, but we have to learn to distinguish when it's effective, when it helps us to be the person we want to be, when it's consistent with our values, and when it's taking us far away. So these ideas of just going along with these thoughts about mind over mood, right, can be actually quite toxic and not very helpful for people, as you're saying, the delusional optimism.
Yeah, so I wonder, what role you think that, sort of the culture of pop psychology, social media, I mean, hell, even shows like mine have, played in perpetuating this narrative of, I'm amazing. And I've shared this story before. Like I had a listener who wrote in once and said, I'm really sorry, but I can't keep listening to these. These people all seem amazing and they make me feel like shit about my own life. And I was like, I can relate. I was like, they're all more amazing than I am. So, And so I think about that a lot, particularly with technology, social media, where everybody's life looks more epic than yours does at every moment, And so I wonder, as a psychologist, like what role do you think that this has played in perpetuating this delusional optimism problem?
I think the problem has been a historical problem, at least in the States since the 90s, right? The culture of pop psychology has grown up, right? The amount of books, that self-help books that people are reading that are not too much based on behavioral science was, it's really, really a high number, right? The challenge that I see is that as psychologists, we do have the science. We know, I think, what's effective for people to have a fulfilling life. And I'm a behavioral person, right? It's all about my behavioral science into day-to-day life. The biggest challenge, I think, is that we haven't written enough for the lay audience. I think we have been writing books maybe for ourselves to a certain point, right? So I think one of the things I'm passionate about making behavioral science alive and fun in a way that any person can relate to it. Because before that, we have hundreds of books about how to be happy, right? Or get rid of fear and just be happy. Or if you don't have the thought, be happy. So I think it's coming historical from the 90s, but I can see a shift, right? I can see a shift. We just have to do a better job delivering the message about behavioral science in a more engaging way, right? Which actually, I think you do that. I think you are interviewing very interesting people that have some science behind what they have been doing. They have the personal experience, but they also have science, and they are talking about it in a jargon-free way, which is super key right now.
Well, I mean, that's literally probably my other filter is like, what am I curious about? And does this person have actual research to back up what they're talking about? Otherwise, I'm like, they might be full of shit. But the thing that also comes with that, right, is that what in ways, and I remember writing about this, is we've created this culture where you have these, coaches and people who cause people to basically avoid, like, overlook that line between risk and recklessness, where it's like, oh, invest in my $10,000 coaching program. Like I remember, I went to Stephen Kotler's Zero to Danger seminar where he was talking about flow. And he said, if you look at what most of these self-improvement, gurus do, and he named one in particular who I won't name by name, but he said, what those guys are doing is they're shutting off your prefrontal cortex all day long, to the point where you are not going to make rational decisions by the time they're done with you. And he said, you should never go shopping while you're in flow because you'll buy anything. And he said, like, that's where the sort of unethical line is with what we do with this, is because, and I know this from having done an event. I remember telling people at the end of our event, you guys probably feel like you have this incredible high right now, right? And they're like, yes. I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, that's going to go away the moment you get home. I was like, because what we've done is create an environment to produce that by design. But you're going to go back to your normal environment. So, there's an ethical line, I think, that we don't really take into consideration, because it's like, oh, your job as the, motivational guru is to just get people to buy whatever it is you're selling.
Yeah. One of the things, I had many clients that attended to these motivational talks or seminars or weeks, right? And I have always asked, do we have any research showing that maintenance of the gains of those experiences? And I haven't seen that, right? I think what we have is many times we all feel lost, confused, frustrated, and we want something different in our life. We are wired to thrive in life, right? And when we don't know, we find different resources. But I think there are resources that are science-based, and there are resources that are more emotion-based. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a huge difference. On my side, I can humbly say, for what I have searched, I haven't seen any data showing the maintenance, again, of those outcomes when people have these very big experiences in one of those seminars, right?
Yeah, you go ahead. The funny thing is, maybe you can finally, you've probably heard me ask this question before, because I've asked it probably a dozen times to people in your position. So, I think this applies to people who read books, people who listen to podcasts, and people who go to self-help seminars, right? You have these three groups. One is the people who basically are just addicted to sort of this endless cycle of inspiration. They're the second group who this thing could be a catalyst for to make some sort of change. And then there's a third group who basically they just do this thing because they're already at this sort of level of achievement where it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like their gains, they actually maintain the gains long, like they don't need the gains is what I'm saying. But then there's that second group that maintains the gains. And yet I think the entire personal development industry is actually built off of the first group. Because, you don't generate billions of dollars if people are getting the outcomes they want. Like I remember Werner Erhard, Dan Kennedy tells this story in one of his seminars of meeting Werner Erhard from the Landmark Forum. And he said, just sum up the whole EST thing to me in one sentence. This is when they used to call it EST. And he said, basically he said, we sell independence, but we breed dependence. And you think about that and it's like, wow. But yet their business model literally depends on that mindset. And I think it does for so many of these people, because if you get to the point where, like I remember I told our audience mastermind group, it's like, my goal is to get you to the point where you don't need me. I don't want to do this every Thursday with you guys. I love you guys. I'd love to hang out with you in person and have drinks. I don't want to be teaching you for the rest of my life. Which I think is somebody's like, well, that's not a great business model. But the thing is that's predominant in, sort of this culture. Like, how do you deal with that? Like, and how do people maintain the gains, I guess is really where I'm going with it.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful question. And I love, the background. I love the question. I'm thinking about three different groups, right, that may benefit from these or benefits from these approaches. I think, again, I'm just a boring behavioral therapist, right? I think the biggest thing for me is to coach people with the skills that they can use in their own, right? What does it mean is that we want to always create opportunities for people to generalize what they are learning, right? The goal is not for everyone to be coming to see a therapist or a coach all their life. The goal is to empower people so they can be in their own, right? But I think if you're holding that frame when you're working with people at all the times, that's going to translate by itself, right? Mm-hmm. And I have seen that. I think that is why, again, behavioral science makes a huge difference, right? there is hundreds of amazing conversations we can have with people, and that's more like talk therapy or talk coaching. But if they don't translate into action, they're like beautiful words taken by the wind. Or people can be actually talking for years and still have analysis paralysis, right? That is still living in their head. So I think the way that I see is the framework we're doing, it's really helping people to be the drivers of where they want to go in life. Helping to figure out what matters, the person they want to be, how they want to show up to relationships, and unpack with them all these blocks, whether it's a thinking block, a feeling block, and then you coach them how to use the skills, you practice that, and they can do so much more in their life, right? So I think if you are holding that frame of making things accessible and a skill level, the maintenance of any outcomes we have are usually going to be long lasting, right?
Yeah.
You finally decided to learn how to ice skate. So you ordered the essentials every ice skater needs. A pair of blades, a new helmet, and a good set of knee pads. And you used your Bank of America Cash Rewards credit card, choosing to earn 3% cash back on online shopping. Rewards that you put towards the cost of an essential piece of post-skating recovery, a heating pad. Visit bankofamerica.com/more rewarding to apply now. Copyright 2020 Bank of America Corporation.
So this has been a really tough year for all of us with everything that's been happening in the world. And in the 10 years that I've been working on Unmistakable Creative, there have been epic highs and unimaginable lows. But it took me years before I realized that it was okay to ask for help. Whether you're trying to build something or dealing with problems in your personal life, we could all use someone to talk to. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp Online Counseling offers licensed professional therapists who are trained to listen and help with issues including anxiety, grief, depression, self-esteem, family issues, and much more. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire to help assess your specific needs and then get matched with your counselor in under 48 hours. You can easily schedule secure video or phone sessions, plus exchange unlimited messages to communicate with your therapist at your convenience. And everything you share is confidential. And if for any reason you're unhappy with your counselor, you can request a new one at any time for no additional charge. Join the 1 million plus people who've taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced BetterHelp counselor. BetterHelp is an affordable option, and our listeners get 10% off your first month with the discount code UnmistakableCreative. So get help today at betterhelp.com/unmistakablecreative. Talk to a therapist online and get help. Capital One is using a serverless streaming architecture to enable real-time analysis. So if you have a higher tip than usual on a restaurant order, Capital One's intelligent assistant automatically reaches out when the charge is spotted to make sure you really mean it. Making banking better by building great customer experiences at scale. Learn more about how Capital One is using cloud-native architecture to feel the future at CapitalOne.com/cloud. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Limitations apply. Capital One Bank USA, North America.
Wow. So let's go deeper into this idea of playing it safe. So one thing that I wrote a post on Medium, I think about 2-3 weeks ago, about what I thought was this essential skill that we should have learned in childhood, but that determines everything in adulthood. And that was the ability to take risks, because you don't get anything in your life without taking a risk. Like, it's a risk to apply to college. It's a risk to ask a girl out on a date. It's a risk for somebody like you to pitch me as a guest. And yet, instead of teaching us how to increase our capacity for that, what happens is, as we go through life, it actually diminishes bit by bit from each experience that you have. So how do you find, while knowing that is happening, how do you maintain a balance between risk and recklessness?
Wow, that I love your questions, my God. I just absolutely love them. I think, you see, and I'm sorry, I'm maybe very Latino in this way. I have to give background, right? The way that I think, sometimes there is a context in which we have to be holding our relationship with thinking and with fear, right? I think we can teach people what to do or how to do X, Y, and Z, but I'm a little bit more invested in helping people to develop a new relationship with thinking and with fears and with anxieties. And the reason is because wherever we go, this thought about making the wrong decision or pushing yourself too much, it's always going to be there, right? It's about maybe stepping back and watching actually where you want to go and if that action is consistent with who you want to be. When I think about risk-based decisions, it's human that we're going to be scanning the degrees of risk, right? Mm-hmm. Am I putting the money in the right bucket, right? Am I choosing the wrong partner, right? Am I moving to the right city? So it is human to try to minimize, the damage that we could have.
Yeah.
The challenge is that I think many times humans, we don't like to not know it, right? Like we are fused and hooked with the thought, like I need to know for sure, or I need to know right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that amplifies more our distress many times. If I take that thought as an absolute, I may go into reassuring. I may, spend hours searching in Google what's the best way to do X thing. I may ask a lot of people, or I may not take action, right? So I avoid. What I have found is that when people have a little bit what you are describing, these states of flow, those emotions are usually like very, very loud. They are like heavy metal, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just push for action. They are loud. But if we step back a little bit from that emotional noise, there is usually what we call maybe more intuition. It's like this soft voice. It's quiet. It's not demanding. It's not loud enough, but it will tell you, what's helpful to you to do, right? So I think to make the decision, right? How do I handle, face these risks versus doing things relentlessly? I will invite people to check. Are you listening to heavy metal trash in front of you and just going along? Or are you tapping into this soft voice that tells you, what's important to you, but it's not demanding and it's not pushing? And make a decision from that place.
Yeah. So this raises another thing for me about the difference sort of between what are perceived risks and real ones, like perceived downsides and real ones. And I'll give you my example. So like I was absolutely terrified to ever go ask a girl out on a date in college. I can't even remember going on a date in college, which is crazy to think about now. But then, the other and the only downside of that is somebody says no, but we make that no mean so much in our heads. Now, the other flip side of that is that real risk is like, let's say you bet $10,000 on one hand at a blackjack table. That's far stupider, and the consequences are far more catastrophic. So how do we one, deal with the fact that certain risks are much more perceived and emotional than they are real, the way you are at the blackjack table? Like, because the worst that somebody is going to say is no, but the thing is that no prevents you from doing so many other things. It was kind of like you. Had I known your background, like I looked at your background, it was like a no-brainer that I said yes. I couldn't believe you would have waited this long to email me. I was like, oh yeah, I definitely want to talk to you. So that's the thing, right? It's you yourself have dealt with it, as we know just from the fact that you're here.
Of course, right? Here's something I think. When I think about our brain, because I think that it's a content generator and a pattern making machine, it's like also an old system that is always trying to protect us, right? And every time I may try to do something that is important to me or something I care about, my brain naturally is going to tell me, watch out, Patricia, watch out. What if this person says no? What if things go wrong, right? I think the skill here is to learn to distinguish if I go along with the thought, does my life get better and richer, or does my life shrink, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to be in a meaningful relationship, you won't be in a meaningful relationship by listening to your mind, but by approaching the girl, right? By actually going to a coffee shop or just joining one of these online dating platforms, right? So I think learning to take our mind as a content generator and not as something that we always have to do what the mind tells us to do, it's super key here to approach what is important to us. Mm-hmm. This idea that, I see what you're saying, that many people may just go into just putting this huge bet into something that they don't know much. But approaching what we're afraid of, it's not about powering into things and just getting down, just jumping off the cliff all the way, right? I think it's more about checking, why do I want to face this? Why does it matter to me? And how can I do it in a way that still gets me out, of my comfort zone? It still helps me to be the person I want to be, but I'm not going into these, I think, extreme decisions, right? Which I think it's hard to do. I have seen that many times, that people will just go these colossal jumps, right? But I think checking what matters, how it matters, why we want to do it, it sometimes can bring this gentle approach to facing any risky situation.
Yeah. So how has your knowledge of this whole idea of playing it safe and taking risks impacted you as a parent?
Well, I am not a parent.
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed that.
No worries. I have a kid, if that helps.
Oh, okay. Yes, that does.
Well, I think in my life, this idea of playing it safe has allowed me to work with many people, right? Because I think that playing it safe is the norm and not the exception. In my life, I think the biggest thing is that I don't want to do playing it safe actions that are going to restrict my work. I don't want to listen to my mind in a way that it's going to narrow what I can or cannot do, or how much I can do it or I cannot, right? So I think the way that playing it safe has shaped me is about stepping back and checking once again why this is important. Why do I really want to be doing that? Why? What's behind, being told no or being rejected, right? How do I want to face this? So I think it's really about unpacking the reasons, my drivers, when I'm trying to play it safe, and checking if it helps me to be a person I want to be or not. Which actually, in my humble opinion, I think it's really, really hard, again, because we don't like to experience fear. Yeah. And we have been told that we have to get rid of fear. So or we have been told that we have to respond to thinking with more thinking. And that's how we play it safe. Either we live in our head or we avoid, right? But I feel if we learn to check when it's helpful to play it safe and when it's not, then we can choose how to respond to that particular situation, to that particular person. So behaviorally speaking, we call that discrimination, right? Or context shifting. So I think it also helps us to be more flexible, but I think it's super key to have, rich lives, to step back and watch, right? Is it helpful or not? Does it work or not? Towards the person I want to be.
Mm-hmm. So I guess, one thing I wonder, if kids naturally, particularly when it comes to creativity, don't play it safe. Like if you ask a kid to draw you a picture, it's like, oh, cool. I remember going to a friend's house and her kids were, 3 daughters, first they drew all these crazy pictures and then, they made just a giant amount of noise in the living room. And she's like, oh, they're putting on a show for you. I was like, you guys do this every night? I was like, holy shit. Yeah. But the thing that I wonder is what you would say to parents who are listening to, make sure their kids don't lose that sort of creative risk-taking capacity. Because that's one thing, I had a college student who emailed me, just I think Sunday saying, hey, how do you find the courage to pursue your ideas? And I was thinking to myself, well, I don't have the courage to pursue my ideas. I just do them because I think that there's this delusion that people who pursue their ideas have sort of unquestionable courage, and that is far from the truth. So yeah, I guess, in a kid who is, probably inevitably going to lose that through the conditioning we get from school, where we're taught that there's something wrong with the wrong answers. What would you say to parents to, ensure that they don't lose that, or at least retain some of it?
Yeah. I think it depends on the parents' values, right? The one thing I talk with my clients, and certainly I practice this, and that's for parents or for all of us, is to practicing curiosity workouts, right? Or uncertainty workouts, on the sense that in the long term, in order to, I think, have a fulfilling life requires us to approach and to experience and to be curious about the world. We cannot do that if I get trapped on the thoughts of, I need to do things right, I'm too scared, I cannot do that. So I think teaching kids that they can have all types of no's and still have a bias towards action is super key. One way to do that is by really doing this mini exercise of curiosity or uncertainty, right? Like you can flip a coin, for example, and say, okay, if it fails on this side, we will go to that restaurant or to this other restaurant, or we will do this project, right? But it's really about approaching uncertainty and building that as an exercise, right? Which many times I do, right? I like to take off to the street and say, okay, where do I go? To the left, to the right? And just approaching things without a rehearsed plan, even though the mind may tell us all types of things. That will be one way in which we can continue to cultivate these curious behaviors, which, again, I think life requires us to be flexible and to constantly be adjusting, right? We move cities, we move relationships, right? So I think if we get too stuck into our mind tell us, we don't develop behavioral flexibility. Mm-hmm. And without that, it's a really hard way of living life if we cannot shift, from situation to situation. But to shift from situation with situation, it's super important to be curious and see what comes with that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And which is a skill to develop.
Well, I think that makes a perfect segue to the other part of your work that I wanted to spend some time talking about. You know, we live in sort of this productivity obsessed culture. I know because I fuel some of it with my own work. Like I've written books about this. I write articles about this. You know, I read books about this. And you're in Silicon Valley of all places. That was one of the things that struck me from your website is, you know, you're basically getting people off of this sort of, you know, high achievers who are addicted to accomplishment. And I realized at a certain point, I think that none of my accomplishments were ever going to lead to just everlasting happiness. And we'll get to that in a second. But where do we, like, one, how did we get here? First of all, that I think that's more important to provide the context of how do we end up in this situation where, you know, we've built this culture of overachievers, kids whose lives are overscheduled in schools. It's like we're breeding, you know, future, you know, like Elon Musk's instead of raising kids now.
Yes. You know, I think, I didn't grow up in this country, right? I came to this country as an adult, right? And certainly I can tell you that where I'm coming from, the driver is not to be excellent. The driver is to just connect with others in many, many levels, right? So I think for me, when I came to the States, I didn't know the degree of competition that people may have, right? Even going to grad school, everyone is super brilliant. Everyone is to just tell you how brilliant they are sometimes, right? But I think you're right, that there is a whole culture that has developed around excellent and only doing things that you are good at and do things right and perfect, right? For what I see, it seems that has come also with this culture of always emphasizing productivity in organizations, right? It's all about automatization and being productive, which of course is going to help us in our day-to-day life, in our day-to-day operations, right? However, I think the skill that we have been missing is teaching people when that's effective and when it's not. When I think about holding onto perfect standards, I think that there is nothing wrong with that. In fact, doing things right and perfect feels good many times. We get a kick from doing it. Do you relate to that?
Of course, yeah.
Right? So it feels good. The challenge is that it also gets reinforced by others, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we apply that metric to every single thing we do, as it has been prescribed by culture right now, that's very painful. So I like to talk so much more about harnessing the power of having high standards, harnessing the power of doing things right and perfect in certain contexts, and learning to do good enough in certain other contexts, right, for some tasks. But I think this dilemma in a time in which everyone is shooting for excellence and perfection and gets reinforced more than telling people don't do that, because I know my clients won't listen to that. They will tell me, it actually works if I'm doing this right. But teaching my clients and teaching myself and teaching others to let's distinguish when it's helpful to you and when it's not. It's a very different message, right? We cannot undermine that certainly there are processes that can be automatized and optimized. And it's a beautiful thing. But not everything can be done like that. Creativity, one of those things. How much can we optimize creativity, right?
So how do people figure out when it's beneficial to them and when it's not? Like somebody listening to this, how would they figure that out?
I think the biggest thing is when we think about values. I practice from this approach that is called Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, ACT. I don't know how much you have heard about it, but ACT is bringing to life contemporary behavioral principles integrated with mindfulness. If I have to summarize in a nutshell what ACT is, it's all about inviting you to figure out what matters to you, your personal values, invites you to take action towards those values, and it also invites you to take with you all the yucky stuff that comes when you're doing what matters. So how to teach people when it's effective, when it's not, it's about really looking to the values, to the personal values. Answering to yourself questions about who do I want to be in this relationship? Who do I want to be in my career? How do I want to be as a partner? How do I want to be as a father, right? There are things that we're going to do in life that are going to help us to be that person. They are going to help us with that legacy. There are things that we do that actually take us far away, right?
Mhm.
So when thinking about having high standards or the perfect behaviors, sometimes that's going to be helpful because I care about the project. I want to do it right because I care about that project. Other times, if I am cooking at home and I'm chopping the carrots, right, and some of them are more perfect than others, but they have different shape, may not be so helpful, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I think, but the way to distinguish that is not so much by the outcome, what I want, but it's about checking what's important to me. What's driving this desire to do things right and perfect? What's the value there, right?
Yeah.
And within that, we're always thinking about values as ongoing actions, like being caring, being affectionate, right? Because we're always working towards that to becoming the person we want to be. So that would be the criteria, not by the outcome, but by the value, by what is important to you.
Yeah. So, as you were saying that, one of the things I couldn't help but think about was we had this journalist named Will Storr here who wrote a book called Selfie, and one of the things he said is that, we have created this culture in which we're, taught to believe that if we are not, Oprah, Steve Jobs, or Beyonce, like our lives are failures. And he said, and this is an incredibly toxic thing that comes about. And it made me think back to the beginning of our conversation where you talked about this idea of us and I, right? So what I wonder is, obviously, this is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, particularly in the context of the situation we're in now, is that, self-interest obviously drives achievement. Like if we didn't have self-interest, none of us, we would just sit on our asses. But the thing is, like we've seen also, I think, the consequences of what happens when you basically move self-interest to the point of diminishing returns. So I guess the question that comes from that is, how do you have this combination, or how do you have the coexistence of fulfillment and ambition?
It's a beautiful question and very, very personal, right? Sometimes I have wondered that about myself as well, right? I think I have a three-part response, and let me see if I can elaborate this, right? It is true that many times when we see people having these outstanding lives or outstanding product or outstanding service, our mind is going to compare ourselves. Oh my gosh, they do it better than me. They are better writers. They're better this, right? It's a natural thing that the brain is going to do because the cavemen have to do that, right, to survive. So it's an evolutionary process to compare ourselves, but we don't have to act on that, right? So I think when we are clear about why we do and why it matters to us, we know that it's not about being a Steve Jobs or being like an Oprah, right? We know because it's something that we care about and you just want to leave your own legacy and you are okay with that, right? But I think that takes time, takes a lot of, I think, checking again why I'm doing this. There is nothing wrong with our mind coming up with comparison thoughts and jealousy thoughts. I'm the first one. Oh my gosh, this author, he writes much better, right? It's human. It's human. But I can choose how to relate to that. And if I check again why it's important, what's my value in this project, I will be okay because I am committed to the process, not to the outcome. I'm committed to what is in between. So that will be the first part. The second part, in terms of how we can handle with fulfillment and ambition, that's I think, maybe more complex question. I sometimes have asked myself, am I being too ambitious about the things I want to do? And today, my response may change in 5 years or in 10 years. We'll see what happens. I don't think that being ambitious or having ambitious behaviors by themselves, it's a problem. It's about when we are pursuing something that maybe could harm others or not considering other people's well-being, right? I think there are ways in which can still be ambitious and we can learn to cooperate with others. It doesn't have to be something that is just all about us, right? Now, again, this may change, or may remain the same response in 5-10 years, but I think it's okay to want more. It's a question how you get that, and when are you willing to let it go? When it's not about having more and larger things, right? It's about, okay, this is what I want to post. And I think it's going to be very different for each person, right?
Yeah.
But by nature, sometimes, yes, like I am the first person that I want more about certain things, right? And I, overdo certain things, maybe more in the past than now. That's not necessarily wrong, but it's if I don't learn when to drop things and when to pause, that's when it becomes dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, so I don't know if I'm answering.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a question that's been really on my mind a lot lately, because I think more is sort of our default. In fact, I just finished reading a book called The Molecule of More by a guy named Daniel Lieberman. And this is apparently all about dopamine. He's like, we're just hardwired to be this way. Like, he's like, you're not going to stop because that's just human nature. It's chemical almost. And, the interesting thing is that one thing I think we've lost sight of is what is your definition of enough? Like, there is no idea of enough. Most people don't have that. But the thing that I have been sort of, as I've been kind of going through this in my head, and just, from the experiences of the last year, like, I think the whole time I lived in San Diego, I was like, oh, the reason I'm depressed here is because I'm not in a relationship. But what I started to see in the last 2 years, it was strange because I wrote it in my own book, at the end. Sometimes I think we write what we need to learn, but was that it was kind of like, okay, I think particularly in American culture, there's this sort of idea that we're going to find this one thing when we finally get it. That's going to be the thing that finally makes us feel whole and complete. And what I realized was that if you have a portfolio of things that add meaning to your life, like a diversity of them, if one of them is out of balance, then you're not going to be nearly as affected by another one. And I got this actually from Jenny Tates, who said, she said, like, if you're a person, if you're everything, which they can't be, that's like betting it all on one risky stock. And I kind of said, okay, let's take that out of the context of relationships and apply it to life at large. Like, we have a model that could finally pull us off of the sort of hedonic treadmill.
Mm-hmm. One thing that comes to my mind, and thank you for sharing that, there is a book that I read years ago. I think it's called Company of One by Paul Jarvis.
Yep, he was a guest here.
Oh, was he? Wow. It's a classic, right? But that book is really questioning, right? The idea that more is better. Now, I can tell you as an immigrant, right? I remember the first time when I went to Costco, I couldn't believe. I'm like, oh my God, what is this place? I was like shocked, right? And there's another time when, of course, I'm trying to hang a picture in the apartment. So I go to Home Depot. I just needed maybe 5 nails. And I asked the person, where can I get some nails? And they say, oh, go to 5. Oh my God, I was like 100 types of nails, golden heads, silver heads, this one. I was like shocked because the paradox of choice, right? Yep. But also this idea that more is better, I think it really reinforces this pursuit that we need to have X to be happy. If I have this, the White House and the dog and this, it will be okay. But I think that is not acknowledging human experience, that no matter where we are, there is going to be different private and comfortable experiences. My mind still may tell me sometimes that I'm a failure. My mind still may tell me that I'm not good enough, right? So I think it's more about checking again how you relate to thinking. And really avoiding getting trapped is that when I have this, I won't feel that, right? It doesn't work too much like that, right? So I think it's a very thin line, because you're right. That's the message that we receive across the board, right? The other thing you mentioned, behaviorally speaking, Skinner, one of the things that he always said, he was a very progressive guy for his time. When we think about Skinner and behaviorists, most people think that it's, uptight people, very rigid and with blogs, right? But science have changed. Skinner at his time was a very progressive guy. And he always talked about how richer lives are going to have multiple sources of reinforcement, which is exactly what you're saying, that in life we do have different areas, our friendships, romantic relationships, career, personal development, that if we have stuff going on in each one of those areas, that's a fulfilling life. So I think that's what comes to me when you ask that question.
I think the reason that struck me so much was I remember just walking through, the personal development section of Barnes & Noble, and then, the other bookstore here in Boulder. And I looked, I was like, every one of these books is promising you a solution to some problem in your life. Like one, hey, get the girl, make more money. I remember my friend said, he's like, here's the online course that'll sell like hotcakes. He was like, get laid, get a six pack, and make a shitload of money, and without doing any of the work. He's like, you put that on a sales page, he's like, people will buy that in droves. Because that's sort of the promise, right? Like that's the promised land that we're all kind of seeking. And it's funny, I think that one of the thoughts I had, like, you mentioned, if I feel, this happens, then I won't feel this anymore. I thought, if I have a book deal, I won't feel insecure anymore. Right. And then of course I find out that, wait a minute, the people at my imprint are Ryan Holiday and Seth Godin. I'm like, okay, so much for my lack of insecurity.
I think it's really, one of the things that speak to me is that you're right. Those books will sell a lot, but it's because that is speaking also to the degree of struggle we're having internally, right? So the messages from the 90s about just being happy and being this, they're still not working. And they won't work because I think it's because we're humans, and humans, wherever we go, our mind is going to have a life in its own, right? So I think it has to relate to thinking differently is super key. But we're also, I think, fighting dealing with this other way about how we can teach people to sit with the struggle and not to run away. And culturally speaking, we don't have too many messages of that, right? Culturally speaking, we have been told that we shouldn't be afraid, that it's a weakness, that you should just power through or get over it, right? So I think if we start sharing different messages about normalizing and validating the experience of fear, anxiety as any other experience that are just human, very different, right? We may have a larger shift.
I love that. So, we're getting close to the end of our time, but I want to ask you a question out of personal, just morbid curiosity. And I think it also came, from that Lori Gottlieb book you mentioned earlier, Therapists Are Human. So one thing I wonder, and I see this with a lot of friends who do coaching type work, is when you're having social interactions with people, whether it's somebody you're dating or whether it's, a family member, how do you turn off? Like, I always tell everyone in my family, it's like, my mom gets pissed off. She's like, everything I say to you has the potential to be turned into a blog post. I was like, that's the occupational hazard of, being a writer, is that everybody in your family is at risk of being turned into material. Like, I remember I was, going to write this memoir about the craziness of the generations in my family. And one of my cousins like, you should probably wait until everybody's dead. That way there will be no backlash. But, as a therapist, like, I wonder, like, when you're having an interaction with somebody that you're in a relationship with, who wants to connect with you on a level of, okay, don't fucking, give me therapy, talk to me like a human. Like, how do you do that? How do you find it difficult to turn that off?
Okay. Do you want the Latino version?
I won't. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So here's the deal. I'm laughing because that's such a hot question, right? I'm not on the questions. So if I have to be brutally honest, here's what I can tell you. I breathe and I live behavioral science. I don't know how to understand life, the world, and people's behaviors without thinking about behavioral principles. And I really mean it. That's the lens I use also to look at my own behaviors, my own thinking, my own actions, right? So what is different is that in a romantic relationship, if I'm on a date, right, it's not up to me all the time to be delivering, my advice, approach, right?
Yeah.
So I think that may be different, right? But the lens that I use to look at the world, it's certainly behaviorist, right?
Yeah.
It's I cannot turn it off because that's just the way that I understand life and understand people, right? But I wouldn't. I think what I have learned with time, if people ask me for some in relationships, people may ask me for a specific input, I may free door to say all types of things. Other times I do ask for permission, right? Can I share my thoughts here or not, right? Because I think when you're a therapist, people may think that you're all the time therapizing them, but you are not. I am behaviorist. I'm genuinely a curious person. I will ask questions because I really want to make sense. I get it, right? And that's just Patricia. That's Patricia living behaviorist, right? But I know that sometimes my friends have said, Patricia, just drop. I'm like, what did I do? I was just trying to work. That's not my fault, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you reminded me because I remember I dated this girl for about a month and a half, and she actually happened to be a therapist. And at certain points, I was like, "Oh my god!" I'm like, "Are you analyzing all of my behavior?" And I remember when things ended, and when friends like, "She ended things with you because of your interaction with her dog." I was like, "Apparently, I wasn't affectionate enough with a dog." I remember asking the economist that was here, Allison Schrager. I was like, "So I have this theory now that I shouldn't date with women with small dogs," and my friends all think that my sample size isn't big enough. She was like, how many do you have? I was like, 3. She was like, that's big enough. Like, but all joking aside, I mean, I've probably pissed off every listener who has a small dog now, but, that's the thing. I think that, that's why I asked the question, because I was like, wondering, like, how do you turn that off? And I know what you mean. Like, I think in my mind, like every one of my friends, like, how do you remember this? And it, suddenly it goes into a blog post. Like, I had that conversation with you 2 months ago, and I think it's hard to turn that off.
I think, the one thing is that I know for me, the reason why I love behavioral science is because not only is a very multiculturally oriented approach, but it's very intimate, right? Because they're not, it's not about my assumptions or my hypothesis. It's about actually really learning from you and trying to put myself in your shoes, to feel what you feel and think what you think. And from that place, I can be more effective, right? My clients laugh at me because, you can have very abstract words. Like if people will say, well, I want to have more freedom. What does it mean? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to me? Maybe different, right? I will only learn by asking and by putting myself in their shoes and, just seeing the world how they are seeing a little bit, right? So to me, that's very sensitive. That's very unique. That's respecting a person's experience. And that's very appealing from any other approach of doing therapy. If I have, hypothesis facts, of course, I will bring that to the table. It's very transparent. But in reality, I know that this is the way that I approach my life. I have curiosities. I may ask 100 questions, right, until I get it. So I don't think I can turn that off. That's for good or for bad.
Wow. Well, this has been incredible. So I've just so enjoyed talking to you. So I have one final question for you, which I know you've heard me ask. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
I think it's pursuing what they care about. I think it's pursuing what they care about and taking with them all the noise that comes under their skin when they are doing that. I think that's an amazing way of living life.
Amazing. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and sharing your story and your wisdom and your insights with our listeners. This has been just phenomenal. Where can people find out more about you, your work, and everything that you're up to?
Well, thank you so much for having me. You are such a great interviewer and a fun person to talk to. And I absolutely love your podcast. Super cool.
Thank you very much.
I have this website. It's called thisisdrz.com. And in 1 month, I'm hoping to be launching a podcast called Playing It Safe. And I'm going to be talking a lot about behavioral skills to get unstuck from worries, fears, anxieties, and obsessions. Those will be the 2 ways to find me.
Very cool. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.
You decided to upgrade your outdoor deck, so you ordered the essentials: a power washer, a set of patio chairs, and a shiny new grill. And you used your Bank of America Cash Rewards credit card, choosing to earn 3% cash back on online shopping or up to 5.25% as a preferred rewards member, which you put towards the cost of your most essential deck addition, a bird feeder. Apply for yours at bankofamerica.com/more rewarding. Copyright 2020 Bank of America Corporation.